Welcome back to DK Sports Radio. This is Chris Carter, and you're listening to Don't Get Me Started. Don't get me started about, here we go again, talking about coaches in the city of Pittsburgh. Now, for those, this is fresh off of, it's not fresh anymore, but it's been a few days since the Penguins were eliminated for the first time in a span of 3 seasons from the NHL playoffs. Coach Mike Sullivan suffered his first playoff series loss with the team. And I was wondering where the media and where specifically social media would take the discussions on the Penguins after that, because this is a team that won back-to-back, and it's like, eventually they're going to have to lose. Now, of course, they have the nucleus together and everything, and they have the team that should be able to win it, so anytime you don't, it's disappointing. But the reality is that there's all these other teams with a lot of other talent in the NHL, just like it goes for the NFL, the NBA, and the Major League Baseball. You cannot win every single year. There's a lot of, I was wondering how the response would be, and for the most part, it was tempered down enough that I was like, okay, this isn't, people aren't going crazy. But what did drive me a little crazy was some of the responses saying, see, if the Steelers acted like the Penguins and fired a bunch of coaches and held them, quote unquote, accountable, then they would eventually find a coach like Mike Sullivan and be good to go, and they'd be able to go win back-to-back, and they'd be in this situation. And I'm just like, oh boy, you couldn't be further from the truth. And this is where I'm coming from. This whole situation is just that just because the Penguins came across Mike Sullivan, who has been a great coach for this team, and is, I think, the biggest contribution that I've seen him make to this team, outside of like the smaller specific moments that he's been able to do, but across the board, they don't react to nonsense when teams are hitting them in ways that should be called penalties and they aren't called penalties, or they feel the refs are not giving them the calls that they should. You don't see the Penguins react to that as much anymore, and I give Mike Sullivan all the credit for that in the world, for changing the culture of the team, and I think that's been a big boost to how that they've been able to win 2 cups in a row, and we're almost able to force a Game 7 against the Capitals, even with all the crazy stuff that was happening in that series. I've been seeing these conversations play out on social media between media persons and non-media persons, and a few of the narratives that have been coming across as well. Look how the Penguins got this guy. If the Steelers did what they, look at the Penguins, they fired Billsman, they fired this guy, they fired that guy, and eventually they found this guy. And I'm like, coaches don't always work like that. It's not that simple. And if it was that simple, then the Browns would eventually have found their guy. But instead, they fired people like Bill Belichick, and he went on to another organization and did great. It's not that simple. And the Steelers, for all the Penguins' recent success, they've won 5 Stanley Cups since the early 90s. They've won 3 since the turn of the century. And the Steelers have won 2 in that same time span. The Steelers haven't had a top 10 pick in the past, 16 years, 17 years? It's been a long time since they've been that low. I think the last top 10 pick they had was Plaxico Burress. They've had to operate from the middle to the back of their draft for the longest time. Meanwhile, the Penguins' core right now is established off of those top picks. Malkin being the 2nd overall pick of his draft, Crosby being the 1st overall pick of his draft, Fleury coming in. They were able to establish this core by picking guys that are generational, for sure, superstar players that the Steelers never have had a shot at. Now, sure, they've been able to find them in those middle parts. You had people like Troy Polamalu over the years, and even right now, Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell, and people say, look at that, and they point to, look at these stars. And Mike Tomlin can't get it done with these guys. And it's like, well, hold on a second, and they're saying that, comparing it to Mike Sullivan is like, look, Mike Tomlin can't do this and Mike Sullivan can't do that. These are 2 different sports. And I do think that there is a difference in the criticism of how these go down. But my thing is that you got to let coaches be coaches and let them develop players. What I really want to see out of Mike Sullivan is how he responds to his first playoff series loss and how the team develops. Because I was talking to DK, and one thing he said, that there's that percentage of Penguins fans who are basically also Steelers fans. But there's there's those Penguins fans that feel like, they're nervous that this is going to be another situation like the early 90s when the Penguins won 2 with Mario and then dropped off a cliff. When it comes to the Steelers, they're thinking like, okay, Mike Tomlin, he's been this guy, he hasn't been able to get it done in the playoffs. Clearly, we need to replace him because that's what the Penguins are going through. And I'm like, I think there's a huge gap in this comparison that a lot of people are making, and the gap is that the Penguins have rebuilt and reloaded through being able to tank and be at the bottom of the league. The Steelers have never done that since since 1980 or 1970. Since I think 72. The Steelers have the worst record in the league. Everyone has had a season where they've had 1 wins, no wins, 2 wins, 3 wins. The Steelers have never gotten to be that low. I think their last first overall pick was Terry Bradshaw back in 1970. And that just goes to show you how this team has developed. And for those that are using Mike Sullivan, even in his most recent defeat, to justify the firing of Mike Tomlin and to make the case for it, I think you're gravely mistaken, because the Steelers have maintained their stability over the years. They've never tanked. They've had bad seasons here and there, but they've never tanked because they stuck with them. That's why they've only had 3 coaches since 1969, and they have the most Super Bowls in that span as well. Let's make something really clear right now. Mike Sullivan has had a great start with the Penguins, and he deserves all the credit for their success. It'll be interesting to see how the rest of his career goes. But I think he stands in a very good spot. I also think Mike Tomlin stands in a very good spot. I think that because right now he has the most wins of any coach in their first 11 years. I think outside of Don Shula. And he's a guy that continues to build his legend. I think he has the most seasons without a losing record of a head coach to start their career since Curly Lambeau. And people seem to underestimate that and the importance of how he's been able to create and maintain stability with his team. And they say, well, Ben Roethlisberger's been there. Yes, Ben Roethlisberger's been there, but he's had to rebuild a defense, rebuild an offensive line, restock offensive weapons for Ben Roethlisberger, and he continues to do that with Kevin Colbert. And the team always finds a way to compete. There's never been a season where he's been around where they haven't been in the mix and at least been competitive. Yes, it'd be nice for them to get over the top, but you know what? Not everyone gets over the top all the time. And also, I think another important part when people make this comparison is that the Penguins legitimately have the best, have the best at times, and if not the best, one of the best rosters in all of hockey. And when you have a 7-game series, you get the opportunity to exert that advantage in 7 games. There's many more opportunities for you to take advantage of that. Whereas in football, if you have one bad game, heck, a bad quarter, you're out. And that's it. And there's no more answers. And I mean, I'm not saying that's what happened with the Jaguars, because the Jaguars were a talented roster, but I am saying that this is why football is such a I think a more difficult hill to climb, because you can have that super roster, but if you guys have one off day or another team just has a really great day, you're toast. It's not even about a hot series or a hot goalie, as some people see in these NHL playoffs. It can be one day and you're gone. So when people make these comparisons, remember, these are 2 different sports, and Mike Tomlin has established a longevity of success for the Steelers, and I think he's still really rebuilding the defense. I think he's really close. They were a top 10 defense in 2017, 2018. If Artie Burns and Sean Davis continue to develop in the way that they have, and they can keep their big guys up front healthy, and Stephon Tuitt and Cam Hayward, look out, you may be looking at a top 5 defense. And a lot of people talking about, okay, maybe we should have given this more time. But that's why you give time to coaches. Do not be knee-jerk reactions, and do not just go with the flow and try to look for a different answer every year. Stability is the key. But y'all got me started. But again, this is Chris Carter, NFL analyst here from DKPittsburghSports.com.